Have we been transferred, Martin?
Yes. You can start, Rasmus.
Okay. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this Forest Talk webinar series and our first webinar titled Towards a Common European Forest Monitoring System. My name is Rasmus Aston. I'll try to host the webinar today, and I'm a researcher here at NIBIO working in the PathFinder project. Before we start, I would like to say that the webinar is being recorded. So if you object towards being recorded in a webinar, I'm afraid you will have to leave the webinar as it will be recorded. But now at least you're informed of that. So today's webinar is the program of the webinar today you have here. So we have the welcoming that I give now. The main point here is the recording, and also that if you have any questions along the way, you can enter them in the Q&A chat, and we'll try to either answer them after the presentations or at the end of the webinar after the panelists. So basically, the agenda is first we'll have an introduction about the three projects that are organizing this seminar series by the coordinators of the projects. Then we'll have a presentation from DG Environment on the status of the forest monitoring law. And we'll have a presentation from EEA on the how we move towards a European forest monitoring system. And then we'll move to a panel discussion where we will discuss how and what tools and possibilities there are for enabling a European forest monitoring system. And as mentioned, please do enter the questions in the chat along the way. So without much further ado, I will pass the word to Johannes Breidenbach, who is a senior researcher here at NIBIO in Norway. He's also the coordinator of PathFinder and is head of the Norwegian National Forest Inventory. He'll introduce the seminar series and the PathFinder project. The floor is yours, Johannes.
Thank you, Rasmus. So welcome everyone out there. The reason why we organized this webinar series is that all these three projects that you see here, PathFinder, ForestNavigator, ForestPaths, are funded under the Horizon Europe program by the European Union, and they're all funded under the same call. So they all have the same aim in a way, and the aim is actually the subtitle of the seminar series, Forest Talks, Co-Designing Policy Pathways for European Forests, Supporting Climate, Biodiversity and Bioeconomy Goals. So we all have that same aim, but move towards that aim from different directions and from different angles, and have some parts overlapping and some parts where we have more, where we do look more on different perspectives. And the aim of the seminar is that we want to show how we can work together and provide the science foundation for these future forest policy pathways, and present how these three projects can do that all together. And there's also the aim to increase the so-called stakeholder integration. So who are the stakeholders? It's us here. It's all you that are interested in forests and forest monitoring. And not everyone had the chance to go to Brussels and participate in seminars there that were held in person. And therefore we decided it's a good idea to have an online seminar series. As Rasmus said, this is the first one in this series, and this one was organized by PathFinder, but also with a lot of support by our sister projects, ForestPaths and ForestNavigator. And with that, I think we can go on to presenting the projects. Rasmus, if you click on, we start with PathFinder. As Rasmus said, it's organized or it's coordinated by Nebio. And the project consists of 3 parts. There's first a forest monitoring part where we compile the existing forest monitoring information that is already there, and that's mostly national forest inventories, NFIs, and ICP forest field data. And you see that on this figure here, these NFI or ICP forest plots are indicated as black dots, and they're different. They look a little bit different across borders. And what we do is we compile them into one system and use them all together. In addition, we design standardized plots that are measured in the same way across all of Europe. And they are used to complement the existing systems where it's needed. So there might be some countries where we need more of those standardized plots, for example, in countries where we don't have a recent NFI, or in other countries, we might have fewer of those plots. And next, what we do at these plots is we use, next please, Rasmus. We use, for example, advanced measurements devices such as mobile laser scanning and or personal laser scanning devices, and also acoustic devices to create a digital twin of the forest at these plots where we measure. Next, please. And the second part of the project is the combination of these field data with remotely sensed information to create high-resolution maps. Next, please. And here's an example of that map, or of such a map, a biomass map in 10-meter resolution that is based on the combination of field and remotely sensed data. We use these maps then to create estimates, reliable estimates, also then again in the combination with field data. And this goes to the third part of the project, where we use that improved information that then exists in future forest scenarios. That means in forward-looking forecasting models that are integrated with a pathway assessment, where we look at how forest management affects future outcomes of forests, and how forests develop in the future, and how they then meet certain targets. And we of course also look at how the policy affects these forest management or land use managements. That's about the PathFinder project, and I hand over again to Rasmus and the next presenter.
Thank you very much for the overview, Johannes. We will go on to the ForestPaths project, and to introduce that, we have Hans Verkerk. Hans is a principal scientist at EFI and a coordinator of the ForestPaths project. So, Hans, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Rasmus. Good morning, everyone. Also on behalf of the ForestPaths project, I'm happy to see so many participants in this event today. Recently, several policies have been developed that set goals for achieving climate neutrality and to halt biodiversity loss. And we need to have solutions or pathways on how we can achieve these targets. And this is specifically the topic of ForestPaths. So in ForestPaths, we aim to co-design, quantify, and evaluate holistic forest-based policy pathways that maximize the contribution of forest and the forest-based sector to climate change mitigation, but also take into account the needs to adapt to the impacts of climate change, to protect and strengthen biodiversity, and to sustain the provision of important ecosystem services. So within the project, we try to collect and use information that comes out of monitoring sources like forest inventories, remote sensing, but also large-scale surveys and economic statistics to get a better understanding on how forests are managed across Europe. What are the impacts of climate change with a focus on disturbances, as well as how wood is used. So this information we use to develop a better understanding of the different processes, and that we then use to develop a next generation modeling framework that includes simulation models and tools. These then can be used for strategic planning and ultimately applied to identify and quantify possible actions that need to be taken over time to achieve climate and biodiversity targets by 2050 and beyond. Next slide, please. So with regards to the forest monitoring regulation, I would like to highlight 5 contributions by our project. The first one are the forest disturbance maps that we have recently developed. So ForestPaths published next generation forest disturbance maps that cover the period from 1984 to 2023, and also contain information on the types of disturbance agents, so whether there are disturbance for wind or bark beetle, wildfire, harvest, or a combination of these. If you're interested in these maps, please visit our website because you can download them from there. As a second contribution, I would like to highlight forest structure and composition maps. So we'll be developing high resolution maps at 10-meter resolution that try to describe forest composition in terms of species or genus, as well as the structure. And altogether, this provides a picture of the current state of European forests. Third, we develop maps and we compile information on forest management across Europe. So we use information from repeated forest inventory measurements to identify patterns in wood harvest across Europe. And we also will be conducting a large-scale survey to understand which factors are shaping the decision-making of forest practitioners in the forest. Fourth, we also provide information beyond the borders of the forest. So once wood is leaving the forest, we will map how wood is used across Europe. And here we move beyond the existing statistics, so we don't focus only on semi-finished products, but also look at the final uses of wood, including also post-consumer uses. And fifth, we use all this information to develop the next generation for simulation models, because we think modeling is also an essential part of monitoring. Models can help to help understand processes and help in strategic planning, and they also can help to identify what needs to be monitored better. If you're interested in to learn more about our project, please check our socials and register to our newsletter. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that overview. And we will then move on to the third project, which is ForestNavigator. And to give us an overview of ForestNavigator, we have Fulvio Di Fulvio from IASA, where he's a senior researcher and co-coordinator of ForestNavigator. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Rasmus, and good morning, everybody. I'm pleased to introduce you the ForestNavigator project. As you see, the key aim of this project is to navigate the European forest and the forest bioeconomy to sustainably achieve the EU climate neutrality goals. Today, I'll give you an overview on the framework and the main objective of the project, which you find it listed in this slide. As you see, we start with a mapping of the status and the recent changes occurring within the European forest. And this is focusing especially on a consistent monitoring of forest carbon and biodiversity indicators. And in particular, we focus also in the timely adaptation in the modeling of forest pathways based on the recent changes detected in the forest. And this is towards a rapid update into modeling of forest pathways towards policy targets. Our second objective is to then assess the mitigation and adaptation potential of the EU forest using high-resolution process-based modeling framework, where we aim to maximize the forest contribution to climate mitigation and adaptation goals. The third aim then is to put together a policy modeling toolbox for the forest bioeconomy, where we will empower policymakers with efficient decision-making tool for climate action. And this combines EU policy models, where we have large-scale modeling of land use, climate and biodiversity and bioeconomy, and national forest models, which verify the cross-scale alignment of the EU and the national policy pathways. Using this framework, then we will assess a series of alternative robust policy pathways towards EU climate neutrality and disclosing their contribution to carbon, biodiversity, and bioeconomy goals. Finally, the project also has a very strong ForestNavigator engagement platform where we engage with the stakeholder for the co-designing our policy pathways. We have their stakeholder board, a policy steering committee, and our forest policy modeling forum, where we bring together policymakers and modelers to design together future pathways. Next slide, please. We have some early highlights here from the project. First of all, we have the Forest for Model data group, which is a geodatabase collection describing the status and the recent changes in the EU forest with a series of attributes, including forest cover, forest structures, and species. And this is tailored in particular to the use of modelers in modeling of forest pathways. Another recent deliverable from the project is the wood-based market scenarios, where we have a set of scenarios describing the future demands for wood-based bioeconomy. And this is relying on a series of market assessment and modeling tools. And then a very useful tool for our model is the ForestNavigator Accelerator, where we have a platform for modeling, for uploading, exploring data, and deploying modeling runs, as well as the visualization of the data, as you see, as part of what we will launch as the ForestNavigator portal in the future. So we look forward to stay engaged with you and to also get your feedback to make this project more useful for your needs. And please stay in touch with us through the channels which are listed in this slide here below. And thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much for the overview. We have one question that maybe as a follow-up to these three overviews, and that's in relation to the policy pathways, if the three projects are planning to streamline the policy pathways, and if yes, how that is done. Don't know if any of the coordinators would like to comment on that.
I guess we are in the beginning of working together on that topic. But we have regular meetings where we discuss how we can best facilitate that. I think that's how much. But if the others want to say more, please go ahead.
I think it's a catchphrase to join the rest of the seminar series, so we can update you on those things along the way. Good. So then we'll thank you for the overview. So we'll go on to the next part of the agenda today, and that is a presentation of the status of the forest monitoring law proposal. That is given by Adrian Tristan. He is a policy officer at the DG Environment. We're very happy that he took the time to join us today. So the floor is yours, Tristan, and thank you very much again for joining.
Thank you, Rasmus, and thank you for inviting me. Good morning, everyone. I'm Adrian Tischjan, so not Tristan, but Tischjan. That's okay, no problem. And I'm a policy officer working in the land use and management unit of the DG Environment. I'm going to present on the recently adopted proposal by the Commission on the monitoring law for resilient and European forests. And rather than its status, because currently it's under negotiation in the Council and soon in the Parliament, I will talk about the possible links to the projects. And I would like to thank you for actually organizing this webinar, because it's very topical, and there are clear links between the projects, three sister projects, and the monitoring proposal. So it's very useful. Thank you very much. So next slide, please. The context for this proposal is the EU Forest Strategy, which has the goal of promoting the multifunctional role of forests, so forests that contribute to the functioning, sustainable forest-based bioeconomy, that contribute to climate neutrality by 2050, while making sure that these forests are adequately protected on the one side, but also that they're adapted to climate change, so and that there is efficient restoration of these forest ecosystems. And in order to do that, we need to have, of course, the data, the underlying data, to take the right decisions to meet these objectives. So one of the objectives that was or actions that was presented in the EU Forest Strategy for 2030 was in this improved forest monitoring through that now we would like to implement through this proposal. Next slide, please. So this is a bit of timeline for the excuse me, just flipped. Yes, this was the timeline for, where we first, as I said, the forest strategy that was adopted in July 21 that presented this this initiative. We launched a public consultation in summer of 2022. There were several workshops that were organized by council presidencies, first by the Czech presidency, then by the Swedish presidency, where these details and the objectives and the positions of different member states were first communicated. Then we had 4 meetings of a sub-working group of the Standing Forestry Committee, where monitoring experts from member states again gave their input on what the objectives of this system should be. There was in parallel, there was an impact assessment going on. And finally, all this process led to the adoption of the proposal by the Commission or the tabling of this proposal on the 21st of November last year. And as I mentioned in the beginning, now we're in the process of negotiating this proposal with the counterparts in the council and in the parliament. The file hasn't really been open yet, so we're waiting until the next elections in June. And I don't know, the expected timeline for adoption would be probably sometime early next year. Next slide, please. So this is just to show the policy context and the different links between this proposal, forest data, and different other Commission or EU policies. So starting at the top, we have, for example, the bioeconomy strategy. And in order to implement bioeconomy strategies on the EU level, national level, having the idea of what is the growing stock, for example, what is the status of timber resource, and what are the uses of timber in the EU is crucial. We have the LULUCF regulation. We know that forest is the largest part of the land sink, so having accurate, up-to-date information on what are the changes to above ground biomass, to forest cover, this can help implement the LULUCF regulation. We have then at the bottom different legislation that relates to how data information should be shared, the INSPIRE directive, and what type of it should be shared openly. So if the Open Data Directive. Finally, on the left-hand side, nature biodiversity, there are links to Habitats and Birds Directive, to the Nature Restoration Law, which is still in the final stages of adoption. So there are clear links where having better information will allow and facilitate better implementation of other pieces of legislation. Next slide, please. So the objective really is to ensure that we have timely, accurate, consistent, transparent, comparable, and complete forest data to provide us a comprehensive picture of EU forest, its status and trends in changing climate. And why we need this, as I mentioned, we want to facilitate and improve decision-making for both by policymakers, on the one hand, on the EU national level, but also by land managers. So we want to really assist, and I think the leaflet that you used to present this event actually summarizes quite well. So I'm using the language used there, but so assisting in disaster disturbance prevention, so having some sort of early warning system about forest disturbances would be helpful for to allow to have the information to see which forests are vulnerable. So forest adaptation, information that would allow us to effectively protect biodiversity, to know where valuable habitats are and what are the trends of these habitats. So I think it was one of the work packages of ForestPaths, if I'm not mistaken, has as one of its objectives the mapping of high conservation value habitats. So this could be very useful in this respect, and to facilitate decision making with regard to climate change, either through, as I mentioned, the LULUCF implementation of the LULUCF regulation, or supporting forest managers in improving carbon sequestration on land. So there are links to this carbon removal certification regulation that has just passed. But that's not the only objective. We want to also enable business opportunities in developing forest data products. So allowing businesses that work with data to access this data and to produce new data products that can lead to a better data economy in the EU, and use of these data products by foresters for better decision making. And so for this, we want to improve access to data for the public, as well as researchers like you and the civil society. And we want to do this by building on existing systems, so existing national systems, and this is mainly in most member states, national forest inventory data. And we didn't want to come with a whole new EU standardized system. We want to build on what's already there, and we want to achieve harmonization of these existing national systems. I'll talk about that later. We want to also use, of course, benefit from the remote sensing technologies, and so we know that the advantages they bring us is the wall-to-wall mapping and the regular updates of these maps, but we want to integrate that with the benefits of in situ data. We know that in situ data provides us valuable information on, for example, for structure, on the biodiversity and so on, that remote sensing technologies can't really do reliably. So we want to achieve and strike a balance between the remote sensing and in situ data by integrating the two. Next slide, please. So this is the structure of the proposal. I will very quickly go through this, starting on the left-hand side. So we have the forest monitoring framework, which will consist of these three blocks, let's call them. First one being geographically explicit identification system, which will allow us to tell where forest areas are and where they aren't in the EU. Then we have the forest data collection framework, and this will consist of three different categories of data to be collected. The first category is data collected by the Commission, and this will be achieved through standardized products, Copernicus products, so either Copernicus land monitoring service products, or the ones provided by the emergency service that relates to the forest fires. Then we have data collected by member states that are based largely on NFIs, and they would be harmonized according to a common reference definition. And then we have this third category of additional forest data. So this is data that we describe a bit more generally, for which methodologies are not developed yet, and for which we would work in a stepwise approach together with member states experts for developing these methodologies. And then we have the last block of forest data sharing framework, which establishes rules on how this data would be shared, and finally published in the Forest Information System for Europe, which is to become a one-stop shop for all the forest data in the EU. That is the objective. And then we have, of course, handful of secondary or implementing legislation. There are some delegated acts on accuracy standards and quality assessments and so on. And if you go to the next slide, please. Yes, I think the color scheme changed a bit. Okay. So these are the three types of data I talked about. The first one being the standardized data provided by the Commission through mainly remote sensing, and these are the categories you can see there. On the right-hand side, you have the ones relating to forest fires. So that is something that is currently provided by European Forest Fire Information System, and others are those that are provided to a large extent by the EEA's Copernicus Land Monitoring Service, but whose, let's say, temporal resolution or frequency will be increased. For example, for the tree cover density, this will become an annual product. And though there are some new products like on defoliation that are to be developed based on existing ones. Then there is the middle category, forest data subject to harmonization. In the first two columns, you can see those that would be based on NFI data mostly. And so the typical data indicators such as growing stock, net annual increment, so stand structure, something that member states already collect if they have an NFI, National Forest Inventory System, then this is the basic type of data that is being collected. Then there are a bit advanced, let's say, indicators that would require some mapping of habitats, primarily related to primary and old growth forest habitats and forest habitats within Natura 2000 sites. And then there are the last two are related to forest bioeconomy on the use of timber and use of timber for biomass, so for bioenergy and different material products. And the last category is forest data, as I mentioned, that is to be developed in this stepwise approach by the Commission together with member state experts. And this would be, I think, the three most relevant ones that I will also talk about in the next slide will be on forest disturbance, other than, sorry, if you go back still, just the first three, forest disturbance other than fires, above ground biomass mapping, and forest structure mapping. So that is something that also I see clear links to the outcomes of your, or deliverables of your project. If you go to the next slide, just very quickly, this describes this concept of opt-out from the Commission Earth Observation Service. So we know that some member states have more advanced systems already in place. And if that is the case, and they want to continue to operate their own systems and contribute with this data to the framework, they're free to do so. The only requirement is that they need to meet the minimum technical specifications that are defined for these data layers, and in order to be included in the framework to ensure that this data layers are interoperable and comparable. If you go to the next slide, please. These so last two slides. This one is on what would be the obligations for member states with regard to forest data that are these obligations specified in Article 5 and 7. So for collection, we say the member states shall collect in situ or ground data on the basis of ground surveys. And we define ground surveys as being based on a network of monitoring sites that are representative of the member states' forest area. So basically, we're talking about national forest inventories. They should combine it with data from Earth observation and other relevant information sources, depending on which indicator we're talking about. And the only, let's say, standard that the proposal sets for national forest inventories is that of minimum frequency of 5 years. We know that this is a frequency that more than half of member states already have, and that would be ideal in order to achieve the objective of having timely updated data. And so we have this 5-year frequency being the standard. And for sharing of data, as I mentioned, we don't want to tell member states how to collect the data, but we would like them to share the data, the aggregated data, in a harmonized manner. So translating their own national value towards the common reference definition that we define in Annex 2. So sharing of aggregated harmonized data, but we're also asking member states to share raw plot level data. And this would work towards this and facilitate this integration with remote sensing data, because without having the plot level data, we cannot really achieve the objective of integrating with remote sensing to calibrate the product, to validate those products. So, but it's not only for that reason, of course. This can also serve the purpose of improving the transparency of the whole monitoring system. And if you move to the last slide, please. This talks about the opportunities and the links that I see with the projects that I've just presented. So we have this additional forest data. There's the third category under Article 8. And especially for the first 3, we say for producing maps on forest disturbances other than fire, above ground biomass and forest structure, the Commission and the member states shall make use of the combination of data from Earth observation, in situ data, and other relevant information sources. And this integration, which would be let's say the biggest added value of this proposal, in my view, can only be, of course, can only be achieved if we have quality ground data. And here I see PathFinders. I had a read through your different work packages, and this PathFinders work on this field survey design that would allow, that would bring this quality ground data. They will allow the production of these European products, and integration with remote sensing is something that we're very interested in, because we know, and you're looking at this yourself. You said on the one hand side, you're looking on precise design based on standardization, and on the other side, you're looking at minimum requirements that would be based on harmonizations of existing systems. And we know ourselves the direction it's going in. The way the proposal was written is we didn't want to standardize national systems, and that's why we'd be interested in reading or finding out about the results of this work package on how this design, harmonized design, can contribute to developing this integration, and what are the minimum requirements, and how can we reuse existing monitoring structures, either on NFIs, or we also have the ICP forest plots. How can these be reused to achieve this integration? Then we have ForestNavigator's objective of near real-time forest monitoring. They would integrate Earth observation and NFI data, and this is also aligned with the objective of the forest monitoring law for monitoring of forest disturbances or changes to above ground biomass that can then help, for example, facilitate reporting by member states under the LULUCF regulation. So changes to the carbon stocks and the emissions from disturbances and harvests and so on. Member states can use this information to produce more accurate reports for the LULUCF regulation. And finally, ForestPaths methodologies on maps for species composition and forest structure. Hans already mentioned this. Indeed, this is also something we find quite relevant with regard to this Article 8 especially. And the algorithms for cost attribution maps of forest disturbances, this is exactly what we would like to develop when we talk about forest disturbances other than fire. this likely cause, and the attribution of likely cause is, of course, the biggest milestone ahead of us, and your contribution toward that and that of other projects. I know that I think there's Forwards that also works on this. There's something that would, having that information would help us develop these additional forest data under Article 8. So we're really looking forward to the results, and I would like to also encourage you to talk to the other other projects that work on this, like Forwards, like Monifund, that also started early this year. So I would just like to encourage cooperation and knowledge exchange among you, so that in the end the EU can benefit from your findings, and hopefully can incorporate it into the final EU monitoring system. And yeah, that would be my last message to you. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much for a very nice overview. I think we have time for one very quick question, and there's one from one of the participants here, and that's relation to what is meant by the forest units in the concept. If you could clarify maybe the concept of forest units in the proposed legislation.
Yes, the forest units would be once we have the map of forest areas and knowing where forests are, where they aren't, and we have the data layers on, let's say, what is the tree cover density, what is the dominant leaf type, so either broadleaf, conifer forest, these can be used to create sort of a relatively homogeneous forest units that could then be used to map on some of the ground data onto these forest units. This is something that it is not defined very precisely in order to allow a little bit of flexibility on how to use these forest units in the end. And it's actually being discussed currently in the council with the member states. So there is discussion going on how exactly this will be implemented. The regulation itself says basically this will be based on the other data layers, such as I mentioned, the tree cover density and the dominant leaf type, and will allow tracking changes in forests, either through disturbances and so on. And this would facilitate reporting, for example, under the LULUCF regulation.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, I think we'll move on in the agenda, and next up is another presentation. This time from Anne-Marie Bastrup-Birk, and she is a project manager at EEA in Copenhagen, and she leads forest in information and assessment thematic area, and oversees multifunctionality and interaction with biodiversity, climate, and bioeconomy. She's also responsible for managing the forest information system for Europe. So thank you very much for taking the time to joining us today, and the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Rasmus, and I'm happy that you're one of the few who is able to pronounce my family name. It's a complicated Danish family name. And thank you for inviting me. And I still think it's time to say good morning to everybody. So next slide, I will go directly into the outline of what I want to say. I would say very shortly some words about the Europe's forests and why European forest monitoring is a relevant initiative, also backing up what Adrian has been saying. I will make a snapshot of forest information and monitoring in Europe. And also looking a bit what is beyond the national monitoring and reporting challenges, and also how could a possible European forest monitoring system look like. So next slide, please. This is very short, but just to recall you how, and you know it all, I guess, in the audience, that the forests are one of the main, or is the main ecosystem in Europe regarding cover and use. And it proposes massive amount of benefits. Multifunctionality is a key word around what is happening within the forest, but also all the links that forests have with the landscape, with watersheds, relevance for the bioeconomy and the employment, and also the urban forest. So forest is really a key ecosystem and also key for resources in Europe. Next slide, please. So forest under pressure, we know that we have many countries experiencing black beetles attacks, droughts, impacts of climate change. There's increased demands through the LULUCF on how much can be removed of the emissions, so the contribution to the LULUCF. Also, the contribution of the forest as also contribute hosting the biodiversity, but also being affected by biodiversity loss. And the demand for wood products for energy, I can only list a longer list, but I will not dwell on that in this connection. So next slide. Building a bit on what Adrian was saying, trying not to repeat too much, but of course key to have a system that can enforce and support the EU-wide policies and decision making in general. Now I'm saying all sectors, I'm thinking all forest related sectors. So it relates to climate change, it relates to bioeconomy, it relates to biodiversity. And it relates to the issues that are transboundary. Some of them I mentioned in my former slide. And to assess the status, track the changes, assess the risk and the disturbances. Fulfill international reporting and cooperation, as Europe and EU are part of global reporting, and also supporting innovation. Adrian was also mentioned also business opportunities, and in general supporting the sustainable development also goals. So next slide, please. This is to give you an overview. It's an old slide coming again and again, but I think it's still the best one to show how forest information is key for EU forest-related policies. Now, there's both the environmental acquis, so what was happening before the EU Green Deal, but also within the Green Deal, all the legislation and the strategies, and to see that that information is used into diverse reporting process, both at national, regional, and European level. There's a fulfillment of international agreements, as listed here, UNFCCC, CBD, Forest Europe, and also contributing to the research projects, as you also heard from the presentation, that a lot of information contributes to develop and to make research projects and yeah, contribute as a basic information. Next slide, please. Just to give an overview here about what information sources are mainly available at EU and European level, and it's dominated at that level by remote sensing data sources, services, and products. Databases developed in between by GRC, but also by other European contexts. There's I want to mention the LUCAS initiative, which is one taking field survey or overview on land use and land cover, which might be the only one organized in an EU or European context going on the ground, because for the rest, the European information is very rely a lot on what is reported from the countryside, to different process, Forest Europe, FAO, and ICP Forest as one of the main ones. There have been also some initiatives in the past and resulting in database, but this is now a long time ago, but maybe an interesting approach for future cooperation. Next slide, please. So, yes, just to give you an overview of the activities at national level, they are varying a lot from countries to countries. but the NFIs are a key source of information. I see that some of my information is a bit missing. I'm showing the plots first, example, different kinds of plots. The setup is one from Denmark, another one from Spain, and the last one to the left side is showing a bit that the density of plots is really huge, making it a very valued source of information. In the middle, you see all the kind of different instruments that is used at country level in the inventories and monitoring, and it goes from the advanced devices as presented in the former presentations, but also that many of it is consists of measurement in the field and with more traditional instruments. And these surveys, inventories, monitoring results in national reports, because we have to remember that the purpose of this monitoring serves also national purposes regarding resource management and overview, tracking, change, very much the same purposes of the EU forest monitoring system, but for more local, regional, and national levels. Thank you. Next slide, please. This is to highlight, first of all, the importance, and I'm sorry, in this there's a bit, some of the words are, or the format is a bit changed, but just to underline the importance of research. And this is there is a huge amount of not a huge amount, but many very interesting projects going on. We presented PathFinder, ForestNavigator, and ForestPaths, but many other research projects are developing different aspects on monitoring and also how to track the state and changes in Europe's forest. Also important is what is happening at national research and the contribution from the GRC to the topic. And I think it's very important to see this interlinkage between the research monitoring and the policy, like driving each other. And this interlinkages needs to be continuous to improve and continue to develop and upgrade the monitoring that you see some example of at the right side regarding national, European, and global monitoring systems. Next slide, please. Some challenges is that there's still a need for harmonization due to these different sampling designs and collection methods and reporting standards. There's still limited resources, so funding is unavailable to think about and to consider. There's still technical limitation, capacity constraints, institutional barriers, legal constraints. There's still quite a lot of discussion about the sensitivity of data and how to handle that and how to disseminate and interpret the results produced at European level. Next slide, please. To show that a lot of efforts are made by the countries. I've always mentioned the NFIs are dominant with 500,000 plots in Europe, but also mentioning the contribution from the ICP forest for the forest vitality. And you see how over time, the contribution from the NFIs have been increasing. So, and the countries have been organizing themselves into the NFIN, which is the European National Forest Inventory Network, for improving the reporting at European and global levels. Next slide, please. And one of the key ways of improving has been through a lot of initiative projects, also the one who have been mentioned, also in past time, through cost actions and interaction with the GRC, cooperation, and also the Diablo project has been pushing things ahead and developing different harmonization procedures. I will not touch upon that here, but having quite a lot of results, meaning that many of the forest variables have now a reference definition and that has been harmonized and also that many are ongoing in the harmonization process. Next slide, please. But as I was mentioning, financial support is needed, capacity building training program, because not all the countries are in, they are all in part of the efforts, many are part of the efforts, but still there is some a bit more ahead than others. So capacity building will be needed, technical support, and also some support for implementation of the system and maintenance. So it's very important to keep partnerships, because there are many actors and players into the monitoring world of Europe. Important to streamline data collection, analysis, and reporting, and strengthen the coordination among the countries, the research institutions. So successful monitoring relies really on cooperation and partnerships. And it's important. FEES has been mentioned a few times. It needs to be further developed to reflect the monitoring and to meet the demands for being an open source information system to share and disseminate the data on forests in Europe. So how could that be possibly organized? And this is the next slide. First, you see to the left, you see what kind of information is coming from the countries, and that includes a lot of different data sources, as I was mentioning before. Field data from different sources, and spatial expertise information, also remote sensing products, other statistics. From the European level, Adrian was also mentioning the Copernicus. Both will go into FEES in the end, but for the member countries, there's a continuous QA/QC process done at country level. But the most, what we are proposing also from the EA is really to support platforms. Here is an example of Enfiesta, which is also used in the PathFinder project, where the countries can input their data into a data preparation module, pre-processing the Earth observation data, and also making auxiliary data pre-processing. Oh, I will be within 1 minute finishing. And also the field data pre-processing, because this part requests really high expertise, and is really linked to the expertise by the people in the field and working with the forest data and information there. But the module is also having a mapping and estimation module, so for making statistical estimation as well as mapping, and the result modules that can produce European-wide estimates, visualize the different results, and produce harmonized national level and arbitrary area estimates and annual maps of key forest attributes. And all this information can be linked to FEES and national platforms. And once it's like entering a bit the area of EA, of course, there's a need of QA/QC, which is also meaning that the EA and the countries need to have a very strong cooperation around this process and this interaction, and then it could enter the FEES system. So here you would have like into FEES both what is the product from the Copernicus and the products, the results from the country. Next slide, it's just to show very briefly who is doing what and making a line what is within the member state responsibility to the right, which is a collection, acquisition, kind of feedback loops between the different data steps, and then data processing, and then getting into the FEES system for sharing and dissemination. And where here, what is also very important is that the exchange between the EA and the countries is sustained. Here, one way could be through the INF net of the EA. My last slide is just to highlight a bit, because very often such a system is represented as relevant for research and for policy stakeholders, but would it be somehow also relevant for forest practitioners, owners, and managers? And here I highlight some examples of how this also could be used for getting some information about decision-making within periodic updates on key forest parameters. Also to follow a bit the risks that may happen around forest resources, also in neighboring countries or at European level. Maybe to foresee a bit how the resource allocation could happen, and check whether the management is complying with regulations or legislation. Maybe to get more engaged, to see more transparency of what is happening. Adaptation to climate change has always been quite successful with some of the platform of the EA climate change adaptation system. Could support also forest certification schemes or processes. So saying that, I want to say thank you for your attention, and yeah, that's it.
Thank you very much, Anne-Marie, for the very nice overview. In order to keep with the schedule, I think we'll move straight to our next agenda item, which is panel discussion. And in the panel, we have Anne-Marie Bastrup, we have Johannes Breidenbach, who both have been introduced before. And they are joined by Martin Herold, and Martin is head of remote sensing and geoinformatics section at GFC in Potsdam and a full professor at University of Potsdam. He's been working on large-scale monitoring of land dynamics, integrating satellite and ground-based data streams for many years, and is a well-known expert in the field. Further, we have Ruben van de Ketchum, and I apologize for the pronunciation. I was sure that was better in the practice round than now, but that's what happens. He is a project manager and team lead for vegetation applications, the vegetation application team at V2 Remote Sensing in Belgium. Ruben's work focuses on developing and implementing methods and services for large area mapping and monitoring of land cover and land use changes using remote sensing images and time series. So what we'll do now is we'll start with a quick round of questions related to which data and methods are available for forest monitoring Europe. I would request that the panelists keep your answers as brief and concise as possible, and so we can make the rounds within our time frame. But first, what is really needed? So, Anne-Marie, which indicators do you think are needed at the EU scale?
Sorry, I was muted. I will restart. Wait a minute. Yes. Well, first of all, the recent EU forest related policies have asked for forest information related to forest and climate interaction, mitigation and adaptation, forest biodiversity, and forest-based bioeconomies. We have been hearing that in the former presentation. And but I think we also have to remember that the FRA and Forest Europe have also asked for information on sustainable forest management and multifunctional forest resources. So what is needed is information on forest resources and productive functions, growing stock. There's a clear need for information on forest health. Biodiversity needs to be even more precise and detailed. about the climate change impacts, tracking carbon sequestration rates, forest carbon stocks, impacts of changes in temperature and precipitation. And as was mentioned, many of the indicators are in fact proposed and are covering a lot of the aspects of forest, the need for forest information. What is also important is tracking sustainable forest management. There is still a reporting also on the sustainable development goals. So measuring also trade and sustainable management certification scheme. And I would also add what would be needed, although it may be a bit less articulate, is the social economic aspects of forests, recreational areas, and also the forest contribution to the national and regional economies. I think I will stop there to not overuse too much of the time.
Thank you very much. So a lot is needed. So Johannes, maybe you could try to enlighten us a little bit in relation to what are the existing tools that we have to get this type of information through a forest monitoring system in Europe.
Yes, thank you, Rasmus. So I think Europe is a rich continent, also rich in data, and the challenge is to find the smart ways to combining the existing systems and tools we have. And that's where where we need scientific support and some gap filling, of course. But basically, I see 3 groups of, let's say, tools. First of all, there are field survey data. Second, there's remote sensing and remote sensing based products. And then we have models that are important. So when we think about field surveys, then we use inventories and NFIs and forests. It's information about, let's say, basic forest attributes such as forest area, biomass, carbon stock change. Whereas ICP forest is relevant for disturbance and, let's say, process monitoring. Both these systems have their advantages and disadvantages, of course. For example, both are not conducted in all European countries. Field data collection is time intensive, so there's no quick results, and NFIs are not standardized, but can be harmonized, as we have heard. This brings us to the second group of tools, the remote sensing and maps based on remote sensing. We will hear more about that also from the other colleagues in the panel. So they produce quick results, they're timely, and they, of course, require some reference data. They can come from some of the field surveys. And these maps, they can be very useful for a quick result for where it's time critical decisions are needed, and maybe also for prioritization of further local assessments. For example, after a disaster, to get a first overview. But also as soon as pixels are aggregated to larger units, it's good practice, and to keep this in mind, that the results or the resulting estimates can be biased and always should be corrected with reference data that again can come from the field or from other sources. The third group of tools we have are the models. For those things that we cannot directly monitor. There's examples, for example, the connectivity, it's difficult to monitor directly, or the monitoring a whole bioeconomy sector. is important, and in understanding how complex systems behave. So these are the three things: field surveys, remote sensing, and models. That's what I had here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Johannes. You mentioned this with timely information from remote sensing, and it was also highlighted in the previous discussion. Focus on timely information. So, Martin, which types of more timely monitoring information do you think can be obtained at the EU scale through remote sensing technologies?
Yeah. No, thanks, and thanks for the invitation. So one of the objectives, of course, that we all have is to have a complementary approach of using space-based and on-the-ground data. And one of the advantages of space-based data is you can get relatively rapid information over large areas, and particularly the changes that happen very quickly, disturbances, fires, extremes, climate extremes, and their impacts, and so on. This is the stuff that we need relatively rapid information on, and that is what can be quite well provided from Earth observation data. And then we're talking about in a matter of days and weeks where this information can become available. We know that we have satellite data that use reflected sunlight that have a constraint by clouds. So if there are clouds, there's no information. Or for example, if you have a fire burning and you have a steam and stuff that can limit our abilities to see the ground. But we have also some opportunities to overcome that by using, for example, radar data, and the European Copernicus program has both optical and radar data available. So we can even get information in cloudy and smoky conditions if need be. This idea of very rapid information and very timely information is also important for, if you think about accounting applications, that timely information, for example, towards the end, having timely information towards the end of an accounting period, for example, a specific year, can already help us to provide first order estimation of that specific year. So it's nice to have at the end of 2024 information how 2024 was looking like when it comes to things like disturbances, extremes, the impacts, perhaps first estimation of carbon stocks and stuff like that. That can be provided by Earth observation data and can then be refined with ground data and other data sources becoming available, which usually take a bit longer to implement and process.
Thank you very much. And I think it's obvious that both with the more access to remote sensed data and improved algorithms, we'll see many new remote sense based products over the coming years. Hopefully, both covering a wider range of parameters and even with improved quality. So my question, Ruben, is a little bit: how can we improve the appropriate use of remote sensing data? You have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, thanks, Rasmus. Yeah, indeed. I think the amount of data that can be produced with remote sensing, it can indeed be overwhelming, maybe also a bit complex. And I think therefore it's really crucial for us as data producers to provide comprehensive training and resources, educational resources, so users can familiarize with the data, but also with its possibilities and its limitations. I don't think that users need to understand all the technical details, but they should at least grasp that the data products, they come with a certain level of uncertainty. And this uncertainty, it comes from several factors. Firstly, there's of course the fact that these satellites, they orbit hundreds of kilometers above the Earth, which means that these raw observations can be affected by atmospheric conditions like aerosols or clouds, like Martin already mentioned. But there's also the stability of the satellite, which can influence the geometric accuracy of the product. And secondly, also, there are many of these remote sensing data products, like land cover maps or canopy height maps, continental canopy height maps. They require some sort of machine learning, which introduces further uncertainty. I think to address this, it would be really beneficial to include uncertainty indicators as additional quality flags or layers together with the data products. In the ForestPaths project, for instance, we plan to accompany the generated maps and products with product-specific reports, documenting the methodologies, how they were retrieved, and also document the proper usage of those products. Besides that, we will also document and provide additional quality flags indicating data uncertainties. And finally, there will also be trainings offered through webinars or in-person sessions to empower the users with the necessary skills and also knowledge, so they can effectively utilize or use these remote sensing data products. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you very much. So to follow up a little bit on those initial questions, I think we could try to discuss a little bit how we can use this improved information from a European forest monitoring system to support policy and policy development. And Ruben, let me follow up a little bit to what you say. An outcome of these projects will, of course, be improved maps of forest structure and species composition across Europe by this combination of field data and remote sensing that was highlighted earlier. And how can this information then be used to calibrate and initialize forest simulation models for quantifying land sea pathways until 2050 or even beyond? Do you have any thoughts on that aspect?
Yeah, indeed. Within the different projects, there will be maps developed and methods produced to produce continental maps of forest composition, like dominant species, but also structure like canopy height, canopy cover, vertical diversity, and this at high resolution, so 10 meter or beyond. And we will produce these maps by integrating on the one hand these in situ data, as already mentioned, like NFI, but also other field observations on species composition, and then complement that with remote sensing data from sources like the Copernicus Sentinels and spaceborne LiDARs, which are also in orbit. And the resulting information, the resulting maps, they can then serve as baseline data on forest composition and structure, which can then be used to calibrate model parameters of these forest models. And this is important, so these models better represent real-world conditions. And this refinement will then enhance the predictive capabilities of the models and allow then also for more accurate projections of these models of forest dynamics in the future. And like in ForestPaths, we will then use these models to develop and quantify alternative policy pathways to achieve climate biodiversity targets. And through these models, we can actually gain insights on what are the consequences of these different policy choices. And secondly, also with the remote sensing data, of course, yeah, it allows for continuous monitoring in space and time. We can, for instance, map disturbances, and that helps to regularly update the models, to reflect current conditions. And as such, we ensure that the models, they remain relevant and reliable, and even as the conditions change or evolve over time.
Perfect, thank you very much. But we heard a little bit about the near real-time remote sensing-based information before. So Martin, how can the near real-time information be used to inform policy targets? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Space-time data, I mean, you can get spatial distribution, but also relatively quickly updated. And that's very important because knowing where things are changing and why is not only important for policy purposes, for implementation purposes, but for general transparency to basically to European citizens in general on where and why forests are changing and what happens to the European forests. So that's, I think, a very important notion now that, let's say, climate policy, bioeconomy targets are much more on the agenda than they have been in the past. And of course, that is also where the modeling framework we're doing in the ForestNavigator project aims at. It aims at really thinking about how the forest futures can look like. And that has to be based on up-to-date data. Just if you think about the last years, we had the massive climate impact on Central European forests, for example. We had a pandemic. We have now a Ukraine crisis, which affects the forest sector and stuff like that. I mean, all of these things have to be regularly updated to really have a good understanding on what and how forest pathways of Europe can look like. And having up-to-date space-time data from Earth observation is one key ingredient to make these modeling efforts and these forward-looking modeling efforts worthwhile and useful for policy and implementation purposes.
Thank you for the answer. And one thing I was also mentioned earlier today was about the forest-based bioeconomy. And I guess we don't monitor that directly necessarily through the systems, but and we can, monitoring the forest-based bioeconomy, help understand the multiple demands on forest and thereby complement a more field and remote sensed forest monitoring system. Are you there, Anna-Marie?
I'm there.
Good.
Sorry, I'm there. Sorry, I heard your questions very well. Sorry. Yeah, I would say absolutely. Monitoring forest-based bioeconomy will really complement the existing forest monitoring efforts and can give insights, understanding about the multiple demands that currently on forest and the socio-economic impacts, but also the impacts on the forest ecosystem. So it could be like tracking how the forest resources are used, both regarding the wood and non-wood products, and that could really shed light on demands for different forest resources and economic activities reliant upon them. It can be used would help for evaluating the sustainability of the practices in the forest and their impacts on the ecosystems. It could also be assessing and following the contribution of the forest-based industries to the national and regional economies and how that impacts rural development. Understanding trade-offs and synergies between the different uses of forest resources. There is also the whole the more traditional forest resources and the increasing use of biomass for energy, but also including use for ecosystem services, and identify opportunities for how to balance the forest management approach to optimize the benefits. And it could also finally be used to inform policymakers to design the more efficient policies and interventions at all levels to promote sustainable development and enhance resilience of forest-dependent livelihoods. So yeah, for sure, absolutely. I mentioned a few. I'm sure that there are many more ways, but to have an integrated view on forest, what is needed and to have the complete views is this interlinkages between the environment and the social economics aspects of forest, which is also compliant to the definition of sustainable forest management, covering the three pillars: social, environment, and economics. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And just one last question here in the panel debate, Johannes, maybe you could just summarize a little bit. What are the elements of EU forest monitoring system in your opinion?
Yes, I can do that. And first of all, I would also like to remind us that we talk about a continuously running system, right? It's not a one-time effort. The forest monitoring system would need to be continuously running and updated. And we see that it has 5 main elements. And the first would be a field, or one of them would be a field survey component. That's mostly based on existing systems such as NFIs and ICP forests. And this could be possibly complemented where needed with additional measurements. And such a system will provide reliable statistical information for forest attribute and reference data for the next element, which is a mapping and estimation platform that utilizes remote sensing and combines remote sensing and field data and other information to precise estimates, and also uses models for those, let's say, parts of the system that we cannot monitor. Furthermore, there needs to be a model-based forecasting and simulation system that is predicting the future forest development based on forest management and land use decisions, and shows us in which way we are, on which path we are towards achieving our targets, such as carbon removal goals. So this forecasting system would then again be very closely interlinked with the next component or element, and that is the policy integration system that supports policy making by dissemination, communication, and controls the efficiency of implemented policies. And all that is embraced by the fifth element, and that's a governance structure that integrates the national expertise and combines it with the EU level knowledge and research. So to sum up, we have 5 elements: field survey, mapping estimation using remote sensing, models and model-based forecasting, a policy integration, and a governance system. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much for all your very nice answers. We have several questions in the chat here, and I think we have time for one. So I'll try to summarize a little bit several of the questions there, talking about who the users are of the information from a European forest monitoring system, and along the lines of, is this really for the individual forest owner, or is it for large-scale political processes? And how do we make this data available and also protect the privacy of individual forest owners? So maybe a very quick, if anybody have very quick thoughts about who are the primary users of the information from a European forest monitoring system, and how will we make this this data available, still protecting the privacy of individuals throughout Europe? Any thoughts on that? Maybe start with Anne-Marie.
Yes, I would say, first of all, as there's still discussion, but what is thought so far is that the forest information system will be like disseminating and sharing the information, but at European level. So what is of relevance for stakeholders, policymakers at European level, but that's also of interest at national level and regional level and local levels, to see how the country is doing compared to the European level developments. This information sharing has no intent of digging into private owners' situations, and neither sharing any sensitive information for private owners and at private owners level. So let's say that the system has one part which is policy oriented and another part which is more information oriented, which is broader for the general public also, and for owners, and hopefully also that it connects to data sources and relevant for researchers to dig different database and information from that system. I think I stop here. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Any other of the panelists that want to have a quick comment in relation to this question? Martin, yes?
Maybe I can say something, and of course, we're mostly researchers and you're on the panel, and I can say that in these projects that were briefly presented today, they all have a stakeholder engagement component, and they all work with different people on different levels to see, in the context of the research project, how also these new approaches and the modeling and the objectives and stuff can be implemented. And if people are here on the call that are interested to join these efforts, and there's surveys, there's interactions, and all that kind of things. I think also feel free to reach out and engage. These projects are on the run, they're actively working, and so it's actually also a good opportunity if you're interested.
Yes, absolutely. I think all projects have dedicated stakeholder engagement activities, and they will be even more active in the next 2 years, I believe. But I see our time is about to have run out for today's seminar. I would, on behalf of the 3 projects, I would very much like to thank all the participants for taking the time to listen to the seminar today, all the speakers and the panelists for their contributions. I think it is a very, very interesting time in European forests. There's an enormous amount of interesting research going on, enormous amount of important policy activities. So really it is an exciting time to work in forests in Europe. And the 3 projects, we will continue our work and we will continue having webinars. I hope you will join the next ones. So stay tuned on our social media accounts and you will see the notifications for when the next seminars will be. So thank you very much for joining. And I think this is the end of today's seminar. Thank you. See you all later.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.